Possiamo dividerla da qua? Le slide.
All right. And now,
E vale a prendere.
here.
So we are trying to also get a copy of a digital slide, but as you prefer.
Yeah, I am trying to share my screen.
So we are at the same level. We are both trying. I hope someone will succeed.
Oh, I can share it, but I'm.
Come si disattiva il microfono?
That's not doing it.
You just have to put it in slide view.
I'm trying to get it right now to do that.
We are also taking the slide, but I think if you operate the slide, you could follow directly your speech, you know. This is the reason.
Sure.
We have a few minutes, you could try, yes.
Okay, I should be in slide view now.
Yes, maybe.
Bottom right, you should find
The, yes.
slide view. Yes.
Do you have the slide? Can you see the slides now?
Yes.
But
Okay.
if you click on the small square on the bottom right, there is the presentation view. Bottom right.
Actually, we are seeing the slide very well, but they could be magnified, you know, in order to have the slide and our video on the background, but okay.
Huh?
Okay, I put it in slide view.
Yes. È 59.
Hey, Tom, could you go
Yes.
down at the bottom, see where it says 97% and try to make it look a little bigger?
All right.
See if that works. Man, nah, that doesn't work. Then you lose it.
Okay. Oops. I'm trying to get it every time I put my slides up, I lose you all. I don't. Sorry.
Qui deve cliccare, qui. E su questo?
If I may, you should try, there is the screen icons, very, very small on the bottom right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect.
Yes, perfect. It's
Right,
good.
and-
Now is 3/4 sightseeing is very nice, perfect. Also, the text could be read very easily. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're there now.
No, va bene. No. Before was better because this is
Just,
and this yes, exactly. If you go then large.
Do you need it larger?
If you could make bigger, yes. In this way is good.
Okay.
Okay. So we will start in 5 minutes, just to not to, you know, to let people
Siamo già dal caldo.
incoming. Of course, we will try to observe the timetable with some kind of flexibilities, of course.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah.
So just to confirm, the screen is okay at your end now?
Now it could be red, yes.
Okay.
Così almeno ci vedono in faccia, no? Sarebbe meglio fare una prova, 2 secondi.
Deve lui cliccare su lì, capisci?
No, no. Webex.
Ma via bene.
Sì, abbiamo una DNS, quello che risponde ai file dietro del client.
Web, giusto?
Sì, la ricevuta. Se mi sconnette. No, adesso è fuori. E poi fai, ma...
2 minutes and a half, and we will open the gates. Thank you very much for your patience. Yes. The cages, even the lions. Okay. Okay, we will open the channel, and in a few seconds I will make the short remarks if the commandant is not online. Mi date un segno, eh? A few seconds and the webinar will start. Thank you for your patience.
I want to confirm my video is still working. Okay, thank you. Because I can't see myself, so I'm,
Yes, it's working.
all right, thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, all COESPO friends. We are sharp in time. We will spend a few seconds to give some delay to join the meeting. I would like to thank our SME subject matter expert, and I recall on first the topics of the first webinar. The first webinar will be an integrated approach by the Stability Police community to combat human trafficking, engaging consumers and collaborative partners in anti-trafficking initiative. And these very sensitive and real topics will be faced by Dr. Thomas Matthews, that is a professor of human security and women, peace and security, but not only, is also director of the Joint Civil Military Interaction Research and Education Network, and last not least, associate professor at Middle Georgia State University. Among other, he is teaching and taught a lot of experience and analysis on conflict and resolution in the US and in Germany as well, on military peace leadership, and also could speak with a shoulder backed with 22 years of experience in the military environment. He will be supported by Dr. Karen Finkenbinder, that is Deputy Associate Dean of Defense Security Cooperation Agency, located in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany, with huge academic experience, PhD in public administration from the Pennsylvania State University. Chief of Research and Publication and the Peace Operation and Rule of Law Advisor at Peacekeeping and Stability Operation Institute, PKSOI, Course Director for the Army War College Peace Operation Course, and expert also in criminal justice and teacher at the Shippensburg University and Pennsylvania State University. Also in her case, a tremendous experience also joining the police department as a military police officer for many years. So this is our presentation. And now, of course, on behalf of the Commandant of COESPU, Brigadier General De Magistri, I'm glad to start this webinar. Unluckily, he's traveling for other concomitant assignment, but we will now follow the agenda. And as you know, I leave the floor to Dr. Thomas Matthew. Thank you very much for joining this sounded initiative, but I anticipate could be the first of a series. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, sir, for your very kind introduction. And I also want to thank Dr. Karen Finkenbinder for joining me today as well. It's a privilege to be a part of the Human Security Network and also to lead today's webinar. As we get started, I just want to give a little bit of background and talk about two discussions that occurred in June at the Human Security Conference. We were talking in a sidebar about dolphin-safe tuna and how when we look at a can of tuna today, we can readily see that no dolphins were killed or damaged or hurt in the capture of that fish. And so we started to begin to ask questions of, why don't we have a human safe logo? Why don't we have a slave-free safe logo that can communicate to consumers that the item they are purchasing is free of slave labor? So
Doctor, please,
yes.
May I ask you to raise a bit the volume also from your input? Thank you.
I can do that. How about now? Can you hear me better? Okay. Well,
Better,
thank you. Certainly. And so, as I mentioned, we started talking about this dolphin-safe tuna idea, and that generated a broader discussion, which led to an article, which leads today's webinar. And we also looked at human trafficking and what it shares with drug trafficking. We generally have a tendency to look at anti-trafficking from a criminal justice perspective, from a policing perspective. And we began to ask, well, isn't there a marketing issue going on here as well? And if there is, how can we leverage that marketing? How can we not just look at it as a criminal enterprise, but as an entrepreneurial business enterprise that we could also confront? And then, so as I mentioned, today's presentation comes from those two questions that we began to ask ourselves. Human trafficking, especially forced labor, directly intersects with the concept of human security, which emphasizes the protection of individuals' rights and well-being. The estimated 25 million victims of trafficking highlight a profound failure in ensuring personal safety, political rights, community, and dignity, which are core components of human security. Weak enforcement of international frameworks in combating trafficking exacerbates vulnerabilities, allowing criminal networks to thrive and perpetuating a cycle of exploitation. To enhance human security, a comprehensive, unified approach is needed, focusing on strengthening legal systems, promoting economic opportunities, and addressing the root causes of vulnerability that allow human trafficking to persist. By prioritizing human security, we can work to stabilize society, reduce crime, eliminate criminal enterprises, and establish good governance. In June of this year, COESPU brought together members of government, the Stability Police community, the military, academics, and students to challenge current approaches to eliminating human trafficking and to disrupt our thinking and explore innovative ways to address the scourge of trafficking in human beings. Today, I would like to begin with the recognition that weak enforcement of international frameworks exacerbates human slavery found in supply chains driven by economic pressures and social vulnerabilities. Today, we will discuss the fact that 63% of individuals trafficked are involved in the private economy. One of the main challenges in addressing the 47% of people trafficked for forced labor is that anti-trafficking approaches have become conflated. It is important to recognize that strategies designed to combat sex trafficking and organ trafficking are rarely suitable to address labor trafficking. And I will expand on this topic shortly. Labor trafficking issues affect 17.3 million people in the private sector. I mentioned the weak enforcement of laws against human trafficking. In 2019, an estimated 12,000 out of 25 million cases of human trafficking were prosecuted, which is about 0.048%. The chances of prosecution for human trafficking are minuscule. Bad actors are incentivized to engage in trafficking. Human trafficking is a substantial challenge to tackle, even if we approach it one bite at a time. Therefore, I propose we focus on breaking down the human trafficking issue into smaller parts and developing our responses accordingly. By integrating anti-trafficking into core mandates and strategically partnering with conscious consumers and corporations, Stability Police can disrupt trafficking networks, empower local economies, and build a lasting foundation for a trafficking-free environment. This approach turns mass consumers from passive observers into active participants in stability operations at the prevention end of the trafficking continuum. Trafficking has become part of the supply chain DNA. In the EU, a study modeling supplier networks found that about 8.5% of EU companies are at risk of having child or forced labor in their first tier of supply chains. Approximately 82.4% could have risk in their second tier, and over 99.1% in the third tier. In the apparel and footwear sector, a benchmark found allegations of forced labor in the supply chains of approximately 46% of large companies assessed. Apparel, electronics, and agriculture are likely to have some forced or trafficked labor within their supply chains. The proportions could range from approximately 10 to 50%, depending on how far down the supply chain one looks. This is where the power of consumers can be leveraged by law enforcement on a large scale. So what? Trafficking in human beings is embedded across the entire human security ecosystem. Human trafficking undermines human security writ large. It prevents the development of a stable and sustainable society at all levels. It is not simply an inconvenient and inconsequential criminal activity. It can also be viewed as a hybrid threat that drains policing resources. And here you can observe context. And I'd like to highlight that despite international frameworks, such as the Palermo Protocol, enforcement remains weak. Again, it is a big elephant. If I can just digress for a moment here, I worked for approximately 12 years investigating modern-day slavery aboard international merchant ships. And one of the recognitions we had came to was that international merchant seafarers have the most international laws, conventions, and agreements protecting them. However, there is absolutely no enforcement of those conventions. And we looked at this as a precursor to what migrant labor would look like across the global economy. And this is the issue, that it has to be a unified approach. that brings together policy, strategy, operations, and tactics. And I will talk about that briefly in a few minutes. So as I mentioned, human security is at the center of a vast criminal enterprise that destabilizes society. It is not an isolated crime, one among many. Rather, it exploits vulnerable populations, sustains those illegal markets, fuels corruption, undermines government, and weakens both national and human security. It makes all other crimes possible and acceptable. And we are challenged to focus on whole of society engagement to human trafficking, but individual citizens are left out of the equation. You can see here observations from the June Human Security Conference, where we identified some of the challenges faced by the stability police community in addressing human trafficking. It's reactive posture, the bureaucratic constraints, the victim reluctance, the failure of whole of society engagement, where stability police at times can feel as though they're running behind these trafficking entrepreneurs who, and this is where I mentioned that aspect of looking at it from a marketing perspective as well. So this is where our anti-trafficking strategy needs to move, I strongly suggest, from reactive to proactive. And consumers globally are increasingly demanding ethically sourced products. And stability police units and the stability police community writ large can leverage this power to create a self-reinforcing cycle of stability. Stability police then create the safe zone for consumer engagement. Adding to the challenge is this concept of neo-slavery, where a thin veil of legitimacy makes human trafficking look normal. I saw this firsthand, as I mentioned, in the shipping industry. In maritime supply chains, labor is the only resource that can be leveraged to increase the profit margin. All other costs, such as indemnity and dockage fees, fuel, stores, etc., are fixed. It is the same across all supply chains. Human labor costs are what can be leveraged. So human trafficking follows this trajectory. Demand to human trafficking to slavery. It's a continuum. People are trafficked for a reason. We can increase our efforts on prevention by engaging consumers, not simply through awareness campaigns, but through concerted effort. Prevention focuses on removing the demand signal. Awareness needs to become action. And so why prevention matters? Well, first off, reactive policing alone cannot keep pace with traffic. We looked at the 25 million and the 12,000 prosecutions. We're never going to get there from here if we rely solely on policing, irrespective, no matter how well intentioned our actions are. So human trafficking thrives because demand for cheap goods persists. That's the center of gravity in all of this, the demand for cheap goods. So preventing exploitation requires cutting off the economic incentives that make trafficking possible. That's the head that needs to be removed, the economic incentive. So you can see here this unified, comprehensive approach that's needed where policy, strategy, operations, and tactics align. However, presently, the weak point lies at the citizen and tactical level, where the population observes anti-trafficking efforts, but is rarely fully engaged as consumer partners to disincentivize businesses from using trafficked and forced labor. And there's historical proof for the preventive impact of consumers. The apartheid boycotts of South Africa, where consumer action undermined an unjust system. The fair trade movement. Certification has shaped the global trade practices to favor ethical behavior, ethical labor. The fair trade logo is ubiquitous. The BDS campaigns that have been mobilized for consumer power, for political accountability, And as I mentioned when we started, the dolphin safe tuna logo. So the current talk is of whole of society approaches to anti-trafficking, but citizens as consumers are nearly wholly absent from the fight. So here are some examples of how stability police enable prevention within a bounded operational environment. They first can lead those awareness campaigns we talked about. Equip consumers with the knowledge of how trafficking infiltrates products in general and in specified operational contexts, not globally, but in that very bounded environment where the stability police force finds itself and is trying to stabilize society and rebuild civil society. Then we can lead an awareness campaign on that bounded context. Certification schemes, working with businesses and civil society leaders, create trusted labels that signify slave-free products, promote slave-free as a value-added providing economic advantage. We can work to replace the economic incentive to traffic by increasing the value of being slave-free. Once that slave-free value is greater than the trafficking itself, business people will make a marketing decision, ideally. A risk index transparency, where we can provide consumers with business compliance scores linked to specified conflict zones. Again, chunking it, not taking on all human trafficking, not taking on the complete 25 million cases, but in that bounded context that we define. Local market engagement, where we certify and promote goods from conflict zones as trafficking free. And we build trust, where we ensure communities and businesses believe reporting and ethical choices have an impact. And so some benefits of this, as I mentioned, we reduce the profitability of trafficking. We remove the financial incentive, pushes businesses toward corporate responsibility. A moral position becomes a business multiplier. And we increase pressure on government to enforce laws. And we protect vulnerable workers before exploitation continues. So, as I conclude, the issue of trafficking is deeply intertwined with consumer demand. And addressing this problem requires a multifaceted approach. And its core, the message is clear. Trafficking thrives on demand. As I mentioned, demand is the center of gravity. This means that the more consumers support exploitive practices, whether knowingly or unknowingly, the more viable these practices become. Prevention starts with a collective awakening among consumers who have the power to refuse to fund exploitation through their choices. This concept highlights the importance of awareness and education. Consumers need to be informed about the origins of the products they buy and the potential exploitation involved in their supply chains. By making conscientious decisions, such as choosing ethically sourced products, individuals can contribute to a larger consumer law enforcement movement against human trafficking. Furthermore, the collaboration between stability police forces and consumers creates a formidable united front against trafficking. Stability police can work to enforce laws and regulations that deter trafficking, while consumers can lead the charge by demanding ethical practices from businesses. When these two groups come together, their combined efforts can make trafficking practices unprofitable, unattractive, and unsustainable. In essence, it's about creating an environment where trafficking cannot flourish. The public's commitment to reject exploitive practices, paired with effective law enforcement and policies designed to protect vulnerable populations, can significantly reduce the prevalence of trafficking. We can create a context-specific, human-safe label that serves as a certification indicating that a product or service has been thoroughly vetted and verified to be free from human trafficking and forced labor throughout its supply chain. This label can act as an assurance to consumers that their purchases do not contribute to the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. By choosing products with the human safe label, consumers can make informed, responsible choices that support fair labor practices and discourage exploitive operations. Implementing such a certification system directly empowers consumers to play an active role in combating trafficking. When more people demand and purchase goods with a human safe label, it sends a clear message to businesses that ethical sourcing is not just preferred, but expected. This increased demand for transparency and accountability in supply chains encourages more companies to adopt fair labor practices, creating a ripple effect throughout the industry. In turn, the market for exploitation shrinks, making trafficking and forced labor less profitable to unscrupulous actors. So, in conclusion, ultimately, the human safe label is a practical tool for raising awareness and fostering consumer-driven change. It aligns with the broader strategy of combining law enforcement actions with informed consumer choices to create an environment where trafficking cannot thrive. As this movement grows, it has the potential to significantly reduce the prevalence of human trafficking and forced labor on a global scale, one bite at a time. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mattiok. I would like, before giving the floor for any kind of question and consideration, and also the contribution of Karen, to remind, which is also our perception from the Stability Policing Hub point of view. The first point is we really believe, and we have matter to believe, that the stability policing is the most suitable tool to reinforce or temporarily replace the host country, or you could call also indigenous police, in order to contribute the restoration of the minimum of rule of law, public order, and security in case of crisis. And this is very similar to the definition that could be found also in the NATO doctrine. But even if we look outside and we go to other international organizations, or even to the general and overarching legal framework of the rule of law, nevertheless, we immediately should face and this is the point I would like also to launch for your further consideration, several points that are mandatory to address our possible way to face the topics of today, that of course is inside the human security, but more in particular, I recall, as trafficking human being is personal security, as also combating crimes. And the points are the mission mandate. This is paramount because, you know, we could discuss as we want, but the day after we would be had been deployed abroad, we should comply with the so-called mission mandate. And of course, we have historically huge differences. We have mandate that stems from a United Nations, of course, Security Council resolution. We have also other mandates that stems and originate from the so-called coalition of willingness. But nevertheless, the situation is a bit different. And why I'm highlighting this point since the very beginning? Because we have seen in the past decades the clear cut difference in between, for example, with a robust Chapter 7 as Kosovo, with UNMIK and also Timor-Leste deployment, were following specific rules to restore and to stabilize, also substituting the indigenous, the so-called indigenous force. And this is giving a capability, a capacity to really affect. By other hands, what we also notice in a lot of other frameworks, because and usually the reason is the lack of political consensus, but this is beyond our capability and analysis, it remains that the other tools that are very usable from a police or even wider criminal justice system framework is the capacity building. And I should thank you quoting as building local capacity, because we have seen that without a local minimum standard, you know, we have seen what happened, for example, I'm not saying a secret in Afghanistan, no, the problem that the lesson or the best practices or even the capability or capacity to ensure the minimum standards were for a lot of reasons, and in particular, as the Cigar reports is referring, due to the lack of policing commitment, was not able to restore the minimum quality of life and rule of law that is expected and weighted by the local population. This is paramount. Of course, the second point, and again, I should thank you because you quote developing certification standards, establishing verification mechanism. Yes, this is the winning factor. If we don't reach a common minimum standards, and let me say that, for example, NATO has been working with standards for years, but not only as a defensive international environment, but also as a procedure to reach a concrete result. So insofar standards are another point that for example, in UN today, there is a huge effort, and ITS, Integrated Training System, for example, on FIRST, is paying a lot of attention. And why I'm saying this, when I stop myself, I have already spoken too much, but when I was first deployed, there was a lack of standards. Now we could, and this is also a question, could we assess that standard had been achieved? I have some doubt, even if a lot had been done. So thank you very much. Now, even I ask also from our colleagues or other people also from remote, they could type also any kind of consideration or question, and we will be ready. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Tom, I had volunteered to help Tom with the questions and organizing the discussion. But before I do that, I do need to provide a disclaimer. I am not here in my official capacity with the U.S. Department of War. I am actually on leave so that I can support my stability policing community, of which I believe strongly in. And I just want to emphasize, I think, the value of stability policing in these kinds of complex situations. And my understanding of that goes back to my municipal policing days during the war on drugs. And as Tom has highlighted, we thought the war on drugs was bad. It looks like human trafficking is much worse because the war on drugs, the drug trafficking is only one part of the problem set. So I'm looking forward to a robust discussion. First, I'm going to look in the chat and see if there are any questions. And if there are not, then I have some targeted questions for the participants so that we can get deeper into this and perhaps come up with some solutions. And I see one from Mark Peterson. I would like to ask a question, the differences between forced labor and human trafficking. Tom, can you take that? You're muted. Can you unmute?
We couldn't hear you. Yes, the speakers. Yeah. Thank you. Not
Tom,
yet.
let me see if I can unmute. You're still muted.
We are checking also the general connection, but you could hear me.
It's possible. If you can unmute him, that would be helpful. I can't. But in general, I mean, I can start taking a stab at the question. So I think they're entwined, but they may not be the same thing. You can have forced labor in your neighborhood, in your backyard, in your community, in your family. That doesn't mean you've trafficked them. So trafficking would be, I think, a more overt activity that you are moving them for a purpose. And we'll see if Tom can can get into elucidate a little bit.
Maybe the micro is off because I see the icon, Thomas.
Okay, let me see if there's anything else in the chat. We'll come back to that when Tom's able to get back online. So let me. Okay, so Mark, I have your, oh, or can you unmute you? I
Okay.
can't.
you-
Yeah, Tom?
Can you hear me
Yes.
now? I was just
We
dumped
gotcha.
out. I was dumped
So
out and brought back in. Okay.
Okay, so what we covered was Mark Peterson asked about the difference between forced labor and human trafficking. And I proposed that forced labor doesn't mean you're trafficked. You can have forced labor in your backyard, in your community, and that person's not trafficked. But please expand. Over.
Sure, absolutely. And what I would add to that, that people are trafficked for a reason, and that reason then becomes forced labor. In other words, you're not just trafficked to go to Disneyland. You're trafficked for a purpose, and I would argue that purpose is forced labor. Now, how's that? And I'm using that following UN definitions of slavery. That you don't willingly enter into a contract, knowingly enter into a contract, that your freedom of movement is restricted, and that your goods are controlled by another. So that, is what I'm looking at when I say the connection between trafficking and forced labor. But to your point, Karen, I agree. There can be forced labor of a person who's not trafficked. But I would argue if you're trafficked, it's for a reason, and that reason's forced labor.
Okay, in the context that we're talking about. Okay, so
May
Claudio?
I ask a question? It's Lieutenant Colonel Elio Scarpa. We met at the conference last June. I was in panel number 2, community
yes,
security.
Yes, please ask your question, and then I'll follow up with Claudio's chat. Over.
In your presentation, your dissertation, you highlighted the importance of citizens as customers in order to discourage the purchase of products made with the new slavery, with through human trafficking, and also the importance of some kind of certification system.
Right.
And in this view, in this framework, you underline the importance of the stability policing activity. I would like to know, as stability policing operators, doing community-oriented policing, how can we adapt our community-oriented policing activity towards the citizens to sensibilize them to do it? And how can we contribute also, is a double question, how can we contribute in creating and giving a contribution to create this certification system? Like you told about the example of the freight trade certification. So I would like to know how stability policing can also give a contribution to this kind of certification. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you for the great question. And I'm going to bounce around a little bit, and I hope I come back to your point. And if not, I encourage you to drag me back to where I need to be. First off, again, I don't think there's a single answer to this. I had mentioned it's a big elephant. It's going to require us to eat it one chunk at a time, and we're going to have multiple approaches to combating human trafficking. Now, I began with the Palermo Protocol. I think it was a good starting point. And when we talk about protection and prosecution, there are a lot of resources. Where we don't find as many resources is at the prevention piece. And that's what brought me to this idea of maybe we should look a little bit more deliberately at prevention. And again, coming back to this idea of community policing, I am not my background is not in policing, so I know just enough to say the wrong things. But when I look at policing at the grassroots level, at the tactical level, it's that idea of community policing, and the context will drive or define how we then corral up and approach human trafficking in that very specific context. This is why I was saying at the beginning, there's no universal template that I see that we can just lay over all conflicts and say, do these things and trafficking will be abated. We have to then look at, analyze, and the context we're in and create a response driven by that context, which is going to be different all along. So the point, for instance, of strategic communication and pushing out information on what trafficking looks like in that area, in that context. And then that's linked to a certification system as well that is provided by the to address the goods and services in that context as well. So we're building the economic system, the sustainable human security network within that context. And now, what is done there will not necessarily work at the next location or the next location. And I hope I'm coming to your question, please.
I think, Tom, that this actually segues nicely into what Claudia has put in the chat, where she says that she believes it's necessary to start working to interconnect the activities of NGOs and certain international organizations that focus on protection with human security. At the academic level and among experts in the field, it's often forgotten that without human security, it's not possible to guarantee protection. And then she offers that in order for work in at-risk populations to be effective, we have to start connecting the terms human security and human protection as understood by many organization NGOs. But I want to tie this to the last question because I think that this actually fits into this idea of building trust in communities, which I think that good police officers at any level doing community policing try to build trust, but so do NGOs and others that are working in this environment. And I'll let you respond to Claudio's observations. Over.
No, thank you. And thank you for the question. It's absolutely correct. And as we're going through it, I was saying, yes, moving away from vertical thinking to horizontal thinking, looking at activities within that context from a fusion perspective. How are we bringing all the workers, all the agencies, all the activities in that very bounded space together to address the security and protection issues? With colleagues of mine, we're referring to this idea of open security and defense. It's this idea of bringing the public back into security and defense and protection activities, that the public cannot be allowed to simply outsource responsibility to address human trafficking. Everybody has to be engaged in the fight against human trafficking, specifically from my perspective, because it is the foundation on which all other criminal activity is built. If we're willing to accept human trafficking, what aren't we willing to accept? I mean, so if we're willing to enslave human beings, then we have to accept that everything else is okay too. So that was when I talked about it being the center of gravity. So I think you're directly on point that we have to conflate human security and human protection together, and we have to rely on that whole of society, whole of community, however we talk, whole of approach, where everyone is engaged, from consumer to NGO to the stability police to the military to governance structures and so forth. Is that, and I can get long-winded, so please tell me.
Yeah. And Tom, actually, the segues are working well because Mark Peterson brings up a very valid point that this can be a very difficult issue, a political issue for the UN, as member states have internal security policies where individuals or communities might be subjected to forced labor. So I think, and he's bringing up, how can consumers inform themselves of these situations? I ask myself this question every time I go to a nail salon.
Right.
You know, how can we put pressure on manufacturers to ensure that their labor force is not essentially slaves? Over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wish I had the answer to that, because that's where I'm at right now, is in how do we, sort of like building the ship while we're sailing. You know, we're recognizing that we need to do something differently, and I'm arguing that part of that difference is engaging the consumer and to push up against the structure, to force, as I said, to force corporations, businesses, activities to be conscious of their behavior and who they're hiring and what they're doing. Now, that in many ways, you know, I'll go back, and again, I apologize, I'm an academic, right? This is not necessarily what traffickers don't want. There's one thing that none of them want. There's one thing businesses don't want, and that's people shining a light into the shadow. They don't want that. They don't want to be on the front page of the newspaper. They don't want to be on the Sunday morning talk show because they've been found out for what they're doing. So, you know, that's a very powerful activity, to shine the light in that shadow, because then we make other people have to either be they're part of the story now. So once people know about the trafficking, once they know about what's occurring, if they say, okay, I'm okay with it, well, then they're part of the problem. But I argue, I don't think most people want that to be that person. So we have to create the contradiction for them. But unless they're aware of what is occurring, unless they're aware of the trafficking, the forced labor, the slavery, the neo-slavery, then nothing will occur. Now, is that politically uncomfortable for some nation states and people and everything? Yeah, absolutely. And I'm be uncomfortable. Because I'm so what the issue is for us in many ways is, as long as slavery is considered just as a brutal slave master and people in chains, there will be no change, because what we need to get people to understand is that slavery is embedded in that supply chain, and every decision they're making at the store in the mall is having an impact. And I mean, seriously, who goes to the grocery store anymore and does not buy a can of tuna that doesn't say Dolphin Safe on it? We are so, and rightfully so, concerned about the safety of dolphins. But do we have that? Are we willing to be uncomfortable and have that same degree and same level of concern for human beings?
Tom, how might technology and social media be used to leverage, empower communities, educate consumers so that they do know?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, Kirk, yes?
Yes, exactly. If I may, this is a very relevant observation from Mark. But the point is the awareness, the knowledge. This is a side of this problem that remain on the cognitive domain. Just let me raise a question. if you have even, we could make an hypothesis that there's an entire organization, not even a country, that is using people working under, you know, unrealistic and very difficult, disrespecting human rights conditions. The first question is, there is an awareness from the victims to be victims.
Mhm.
But this is valid for any kind of crimes, if I may. You could have even a sexual exploitation and abuse. The first question, as a police officer, also in conducting investigation, there is, however, an awareness, or even we are at the stage that the victims is not even aware that
Mhm.
is suffering something that in the general consensus of opinion should
Right.
be evaluated as a crime or at least a breach of law.
Right.
And on this, I totally agree. The first step is information, information, and information. Afterwards, a lot of things could happen. Internally, if the system is done to work exploiting a certain kind, for example, of minorities, it's very difficult that the system per se will adapt any kind of corrective. But information is the first step. Secondarily, as a stability policing officer, I argue and I hope, if and when we receive some kind of mandate, of course, depends. I have told since the very beginning which kind of mandates we receive, but you know, also in reporting, even if it's not substitutive power, and making proper statements, we should also in this case ameliorate the worst case scenario that is simply nothing happened. No, something maybe is happening, and this is the report highlighting what is happening. And we know, and if we don't know, we will disseminate, which should be the international standard. This is the first point. Then we have seen a lot of success and a lot of not completely successful operation or mission. Thank you very much.
No, and thank you, sir, and thank you for the question, and Karen. And it just like had my two, yes, absolutely. This is that idea too, and I agree with the observation, with your observation, that communication is vitally important. One, I've seen on international merchant ships, seafarers who do not know they're victims of forced labor and trafficking. I've seen that personally, and so I think your point is very well made. They have to also be able to recognize that they are in fact victims. That I agree. The communication is vitally important, and this is where I'm still looking at this. I know enough, just to, as I said, to get in trouble. We need a convening authority for that communication to occur. We have a lot of actors. We have a lot of people doing things. We have a lot of, but they need to get corralled up by a convening authority that will bring that strategic communication together, that will occur over social media, that will occur in legacy media, that will be manifested in school curriculum, K through 12, where, I mean, my gosh, I think more people quit smoking because their children were taught about how bad smoking was in schools and came home and forced their parents to quit smoking. It's leveraging that kind of thinking that if we can begin to get children to look at modern day slavery, neo-slavery, trafficking, and how it's become part of our everyday life, and they begin to ask those questions. So it's a strategic approach that occurs throughout the social structure at all levels simultaneously. And so that's how we're taking the multiple chunks of that elephant out. Now, where does all of that go? Well, and to some degree, we have to rely on the wisdom of the system, that it will all go in a very positive direction. But to stand by and do nothing is completely unacceptable.
There's a couple of observations in the chat that are probably worth talking about here. Of course, we have, and I'm sorry, I can't read the whole name, it's cut off, but Gian Diego says, as an additional point, the proceeds of human trafficking are largely laundered. So in my view, it's paramount also for the stability police to be able to counter the related money laundering. through specialized tools and personnel.
Sure, sure.
Also, Biagio Bosano says, looking to the future, AI could be used by traffickers as an effective tool to recruit an ever increasing number of victims. In your opinion, how could the international community effectively respond to this risk? And other than use AI ourselves, which can also be something. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, great. This is great. This is excellent conversation, great conversation. And if I can, I just want to say one thing. What I'm proposing, what I'm suggesting, I'm positing as part of the solution. So I'm not suggesting by any way that this is the answer. It's what I believe is a contribution to eating that elephant. It's enhancing and building at the protection end, at the prevention end. We've been working on the protection and the prosecution end, and I'm arguing for an enhanced approach from the prevention end. And so I am not in any way suggesting that this supplants anything else, or this is the answer, or forget about doing everything else. We need to continue doing everything we're doing. I just want to also add that I think we could do a heck of a lot more at the prevention end. And so that's where I'm coming from. And so, you know, will AI play a role in trafficking in the future? I mean, absolutely, it's playing a role in, certainly in my life, on a daily basis at the university. How we're going to effectively respond to that risk, I think I don't have an answer for that. I think that is going to have to be part of this ongoing conversation of how we take a multifaceted approach to addressing trafficking. And again, I apologize, I just don't have an answer for that one.
So, Tom, let's look a bit at the certification and the risk index. So the proposed risk index would assess businesses' compliance with anti-trafficking standards and make findings public.
Right.
So thinking as a consumer, would, as a consumer, actively use such an index when making purchasing decisions? Why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, I do. When I was made aware of issues with some clothing manufacturers, we stopped going to those stores and we stopped buying those clothes because we were made aware of it. Until then, I would happily went ahead and bought jeans and shirts at these particular stores. So I think two things. I believe most business people make business decisions. And as I mentioned, the place they can leverage or increase their profit margin is by leveraging labor costs, by outsourcing, by subcontracting, by doing any number of things. Now, they will continue on that path until it becomes bad business. And by informing consumers, by shining a light in the shadow of what's going on, by showing where subcontractors are in fact providing the slave labor that's making a company, increase company's profit. Well, then I think people will make a business decision to not use that labor because it's not in their interest. I believe all people and all businesses follow their own interest. And once something becomes not in their interest, they will change. And until they're forced or pushed to change, they'll continue on. And as I said, I saw that in the shipping industry on a daily basis. I mean, it was in their interest to keep people in that neo-slave kind of context.
So I'm hearing that you think you're proposing that the transparency will impact corporate behavior and that it could realistically change market dynamics
Yeah,
Uh,
yes.
So do you see perhaps tackling one part of the business world just to as a sort of a test case? And
Sure.
I mentioned nail salons.
Uh-huh.
So throughout the world, people go to nail salons, and I have heard from every person that goes to one, wow, I wish I knew
Mhm.
if this was forced labor or not.
Yep.
And so maybe just what's the wisdom of perhaps just tackling one industry?
No, I think it's a great idea, you know, and once you put the certification sign in that nail salon's window that it's certified free of slave and traffic labor, you know, now people have a decision when they go to the next salon and don't see the sign. Why don't you have the sign? You know, I think that's number one. I think you're absolutely correct. The other thing I want to say, and this came up in our conversations at the Human Security Conference, it's also having I don't know how to say this. I can't think of the right word, but we have to look at our expectations. Let's say that we do all of this and we only impact 10 or 20% of the issue. That's 10 or 20%. It didn't get impacted before. So, you know, sometimes we want to get 100%. We want to get 80%. I'm arguing in this context, we need to use a building block approach. If I can get 10%, I got 10%. Now I can move on to the next 10% and so on. So I think too, it's as you mentioned, and I think that's a great approach, Karen. Look, that's going to be our bite. We're going to go ahead and proof of concept by looking just at nail salons in Warner Robins, Georgia, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, whatever, and then see, has that made an impact? Interview people about it. And then we can go ahead and expand that and try and pick out another industry. Let's look at in Georgia, the people who pick onions. So again, I think it's connecting all those dots, Karen. I agree.
Okay, and on that note, Tom, I think we've had a good question and answer session. So I will give you a couple of minutes to wrap up if there are any final thoughts you'd like to say. And if someone has an urgent question they want to put in the chat, please do, and we can follow up with those.
No, I'm good. Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. As I said again, it's a difficult and incredibly complex, heartbreaking subject, and I certainly appreciate people's attention to this and willingness to share some time to look at it. Again, as I said, this is not the solution. It's, I think, my contribution to the fight in saying, you know, let's try this as well.
Okay, and on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to our host. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you very much again, Thomas and Karen, really highlighting. Now, a very few words to wrap up and conclude. So the first point I would like to say is, with your consent, we will disseminate the concept note that we already do elaborated to all the participants to this WebEx seminar. First and foremost, the second point, I will even dare to say that about the last question on artificial intelligence could be used to explore maybe for the future in the next months and to take life with interest on a so interesting matter and subjects. Having told that, I should thank you all and also all the participants from remote. This is from remote modality seminar. Also on behalf of our commander, Brigadier General De Magistris, and the COESPO community is always ready also to receive your input through our research section. We will be able to develop any future course of action. And again, we would like and we will strive to maintain focus on this human security environment. So I will launch and I will close saying maybe the next time we could really think about the artificial intelligence as a tool that could be used to exploit even more the fragile categories. So thank you very much, and see you soon. We will keep in touch through the mailing list. Thank you very much.
Thank
From
you.
the-
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, sir. Thank you.